If we could just go back and ask a question that you've probably been asked 1,000 times, can we have a summary of your career in dog training?
Sure. I got a dog from a shelter, and she was a fantastic dog. Her name was Penny, but she was the sweetest, kindest, least watchdoggy dog you could ever want.
Breed?
Right? Yeah, it was so once you get one, it's like potato chips, right?
Yeah.
You gotta have, or crisps.
Yeah,
you gotta have more than one, right? So when I really didn't know what I was doing, I found myself amongst good people, and so that made a huge difference. I try and share, not just some of what I know, but I will share whatever I know to try and help people, because I feel like that was done for me.
Which aspect of your career did you or do you enjoy the most?
That's a tough one, because
You mentioned PSA then, and something I always have great difficulty is explaining to someone who is not involved with dogs
right.
what PSA is and why we do it.
Right.
So I'm sat there with a non-dog friend, and
the dog, the human, they don't want to be anywhere else at that moment. Right? And I feel that way when I'm showing my dogs. It kind of chokes me up to even think about it a little bit, because it's like you only understand it when you put in the work.
this week, my guest on Caffeine and Canines is none other than the man himself, Mr. Jerry Bradshaw. Jerry Bradshaw, police and protection dog trainer for over 25 years, one of the most experienced minds in the dog training industry, especially when it comes to bitey dogs. Jerry is the creator of the sport that Stark and I partake in, which is PSA, which stands for Protection Sports Association. And I'm very happy to have Jerry on the podcast in person, as we are very lucky to have him come and host a seminar here at the Yorkshire Canine Academy. We talk all things PSA and protection sports, and it was a great episode and really great to speak to Jerry, not only on our podcast, but in person too. Hope you enjoy the episode. How was your drive up yesterday?
It was good.
Yeah,
it was not bad. We're used to longer drives, I guess, than you guys are.
Yeah, exactly. Everything's around the corner for us, right? I lived in Australia for a while, and before I went out there, they said I would be living next to Brisbane. It was like 2.5 hours away, and I was like, that's not next to Brisbane. They're like, for us, it's next to Brisbane. Exactly. And I was like, oh, fair enough. So I guess you're used to commuting all up and down the country for trials and stuff. Been at the RAF base this week, is that right? What sort of stuff did you do with them?
A lot of foundation stuff, they had a lot of young handlers, younger dogs, so we were just working on some foundation, like same stuff, drive channeling foundation, some grip work stuff with some of the dogs, and then some just kind of like generalization of taking pressure and things like that, just showing them some different pictures and showing them how to like prepare dogs a little more efficiently. You know what I mean? Like work on multiple things at the same time.
Yeah, gotcha. How does that sort of work compared to maybe sport dog work?
Different in terms of, I think it's a lot more bigger picture stuff when you're working with police dogs and military dogs. The attention to detail that sport people have is like a different level,
Yeah.
And so you're just trying to minimize a lot of handling mistakes and things like that when you're working with those types of dogs, and keeping the end state in mind of what they're trying to accomplish, which is to have a functional police dog that'll do the things that they needed to do, right? And kind of keeping the goal on that, which is usually a dog that'll bite for real. And
do they have a more narrowed arsenal of skills compared to a sport dog, or is it similar?
To a certain extent, yeah. Like they don't, if they have like one way to out their dog, like an out and return, that's probably all they ever do.
Gotcha.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of the things like we would do in, let's say, like level 2 or level 3 with our dogs and the protection work is going to be kind of foreign to them. They've got, and they're also somewhat married to like their certification skills that they have to, they have to constantly work, and because like they call it literally licensing.
Yeah.
Like the dog has to get licensed, right? So if he doesn't pass certification, you don't work. So it's a little bit of a different.
What does that certification look like
for these guys over here?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know all the details of what they do over here, but like they have a lot more limited scope of using their dogs.
Gotcha.
So like some of it is more or less like they can't like send their dog into a building to find somebody and bite them, right? Like, so, they're usually trying to locate somebody.
It's got to be a fleeing suspect, or
Yeah, it has to be somebody who's like actively fleeing or threatening, things of that nature. So they have, like when we talk about, say, for example, police dogs biting passive people. That's a big thing in the United States, right? So, somebody's going to be hiding from you, and you have to send the dog in to locate them and apprehend them, and then they have a prohibition against that kind of stuff. So the dog would have to indicate by barking. Even if somebody is hiding in plain sight, and the dog locates them, they have to like basically bark at them, right? So it's very different. And I mean, to a certain extent, I understand it. Like the gun crime over here is going to be a lot less, although guys have a lot of knife crimes, and so they also have to be aware that, the people that they're finding, could be armed and be able to inflict lethal harm too. So yeah. So, but a little bit of the policing's a bit different over here than it is where we are. So it was kind of interesting to just sort of exchange those things and like kind of let them know like what we do, what some of the missions are for some of the police dogs over here.
So you've got a little bit more carte blanche than police dog handlers here.
To a certain extent, like some of it's driven by like SOP, like standard operating procedures, and how that might be written for any particular department, right? And then some departments have sort of more restrictive procedures than others might, right? All of it's in the United States, at least, is governed basically by case law. Like use of force is use of force, and we have to be able to justify the use of force, based on prior case law in the United States. So most of that, a lot of that is like Supreme Court case law, and so that would hold sway over the entirety of all the various jurisdictions in the United States. But at the end of the day, the police officers have to operate within the guidelines that their departments have basically set forward. So they have the operating procedures, and then they have their manuals and so forth about how they're expected to conduct operations, and different. We're so big over in the United States, like different jurisdictions and different departments have. Some of them have tremendous amount of resources, like they've got air units and drone units and things of that nature, and then you go to some place and like really rural North Carolina where I'm from, and you don't have you're lucky to have a couple of backup guys to run a track with you, right? Whereas out in Los Angeles, they may be able to swiftly put up a perimeter around a 3-block radius, get air units up and have drones looking for people, and they've got 4 or 5 canines that they can task to service to find this one person that's done this crime, and and then they knock on all the doors and they make announcements in different languages, and then finally they can start bringing the canine assets to bear and doing the searching and all that stuff. So that's a very different way to operate than than if you're in a rural area and you're looking for somebody who might have done a similar crime. You don't have the resources to be able to bring all of that to bear. So so those departments have to operate a bit differently when they're working with those situations, right?
If we could just go back and ask a question that you've probably been asked 1,000 times, can we have a summary of your career in dog training?
Sure.
I know it spans over, 25 years, I think?
Well, yeah, it's like 30 years now.
Yeah.
I just started doing, like playing with pet dogs, right? Like I never really owned dogs growing up. And when I was in grad school at UNC North Carolina, my house got broken into. And so the thought, was to get a dog. And so I got a dog from a shelter, and she was a fantastic dog. Her name was Penny, but she was the sweetest, kindest, like least watchdoggy dog you could ever want.
What breed?
Right? Yeah, it was she's just a mixed shepherd mix.
Okay.
And so I spent hours trying to teach her how to bark.
Okay.
Right, and she really, I would like make siren noises, and like I was trying everything to get this dog to bark. She would bark, but not at anybody coming to the house.
Gotcha.
Or anything. So, So I decided that we had to get another dog. So once you get one, it's like potato chips, right? You
Yeah.
got to have, or crisps.
Yeah,
You got to have more than one, right? So we decided to get another dog, and so I did what any intelligent, highly professional dog person would do. I went to our AKC breed book
Yep.
and wanted to find a dog that looked like Penny, because
Okay.
that obviously would
It should
do
be the
trick.
same, right?
Should
Yeah,
be,
of course.
yeah, but better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I looked at different dogs, and I came across a Belgian Malinois, right? That was in
Right.
there. And the description, hit all the targets that I wanted to hit, which was, loyal, protective, all that kind of
Intelligent,
stuff, right?
athletic.
Intelligent, athletic, yes.
No
Everything
problems
that you
there
need.
whatsoever, obviously.
Yeah, no, everything you need for like apartment living.
Yeah.
And so, but I finally ran into a breeder of Malinois who was up in Canada at the time, and he had just had a litter of puppies that had reached about 7 weeks old, and I think he sold every one of them except for the puppy I would eventually get to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Mm-hmm. And he said, but this dog, he's going to be, he'll probably be a good watchdog, but he's not going to really make much as a working dog or a sport dog or something like that.
How old
like,
was the dog at this point?
He was like 6, 7 weeks, something like that.
Yeah.
It was like early in his life, but they had already arranged for all the other dogs to go to the police, and except him. And so so I was like, but that's what I want. I just wanted a protective dog to live in the house, and so he thought it would fit the bill. But he made 2 requirements of me. One was that I had to read Stuart Hilliard's book on Schutzhund. Mm-hmm. Right, so I had to go find that, and then the other one was that I had to go to a Schutzhund club with the dog.
Yep.
And at least get the dog evaluated and get some training advice from them, and so forth. So we found a club and started going out there, and just kind of like fell in love with dog training. From that, I'd already kind of fallen in love with it a little bit with Penny when I was going to like classes and. Mm-hmm. Just doing basic obedience stuff, just going to the Animal Protection Society in Chapel Hill. They had classes there, and so I get this dog Arrow, and I start taking him to, to some obedience classes, and start taking him to the Schutzhund Club, and it just kind of took off from there. Got into it, and started getting I got another dog after that, right?
Another Malinois?
Malinois from the same breeder, but it was
Okay.
an older one because I was a little impatient, and I wanted my puppy to be like doing stuff fast. And
Yeah.
my training director and club decoys kept saying, "Slow down, like let the puppy develop," and all this business. So I got an older dog that another guy had that was he was there having they couldn't put a title on him, right? So.
Yeah.
So I took this dog and started working with him, and so he provided sufficient challenge to keep me busy while my other dog was growing up and maturing, and then I started spending way more time training my dogs and working on my doctoral dissertation. I was in grad school at the time, and so I was instead of being in my office writing pages of my thesis, I was on soccer fields tracking and doing obedience, and just couldn't wait to get to club. We had club 3 times a week, and
Mm-hmm.
that's really what I wanted to do, was go out there and train my dogs. And so one day I decided I had enough of academic life, and left my PhD program, and
Mm-hmm.
started doing some dog training on the side a little bit. By that time I had spent a little time in the Schutzhund Club, and gotten a certain amount of training in with my dogs, and started getting some titles and stuff like that. So, but I just switched my emphasis in my life completely and started doing dog stuff, and started my own little obedience training company, and working with pet dogs mostly, and and that was it. And I just got into it. I met a lot of people in the police world from being in the Schutzhund world when I first started out. Got to that puppy ended up going to Schutzhund Nationals in 1996. He was about 5, I think, when we went to nationals, and we did pretty well. And then after that, got interested in and really interested in sport. He ended up having a stroke, so I couldn't I got like 5 times Schutzhund 3 on him, and
Oh,
we went
really?
to nationals. Did well at nationals. came in like 20th out of a field of like 60 plus teams that were from all over the country. Yeah, and then kind of got into just doing more training, doing more working dog stuff. Got met people that were doing police dog stuff, and so I started mentoring with some of those folks and kind of learning some of that, and traded off a lot of decoy work in my younger days for knowledge.
Sacrificing the body.
Yeah. And and I was lucky because I always found myself in good spots, right? Like when I found a Schutzen club, I found a good Schutzen club. I found like good people who knew what they were doing, and a lot of people don't get lucky. They end up in a place where they're not getting good knowledge or they're not getting good advice. And the people I ended up mentoring with in the police dog world and so forth gave me a lot of good advice and a lot of good training. And so I have to say I've been blessed in that sense. And when I really didn't know what I was doing, I found myself amongst good people, and so that made a huge difference in terms of my own personal growth and my growth as a trainer and so forth. So I try and take that and kind of give back in terms of teaching and our dog trainer school, the people that I coach, our club, and I come out and do things like this, like doing seminars and so forth. Is I try and share not just some of what I know, but I will share whatever I know to try and help people, because I feel like that was done for me.
Yep.
And so it's only right to kind of give back to the profession what I was given and what's made me happy over the last 30 years.
Which aspect of your career did you or do you enjoy the most?
That's a tough one, because there's different things I like for different reasons, right? Like I like working with our student trainers in our dog trainer school. I like coaching people one-on-one, but I also really like training my own dogs and competing. And club, like PSA Club to me is one of those places where people don't have to follow my advice as a training director. Like I tell them what I think, but I also like the people in my club to kind of develop as independent trainers themselves, and to use their own heads about what they're doing and make their own decisions about a lot of stuff. Obviously in the beginning you have to guide people more, but I like to, as it were, teach people to fish rather than provide the fish for them, right?
Yep.
And so like I like working with young trainers who are learning and and trying to develop and help them kind of like develop their own song, as it were. Like they've got their own spin on things and how they do things. I like that. I don't want everybody that works around me or with me or in my club to be like a carbon copy of me. I think that's kind of narcissistic to think that anything like that should happen. But at the end of the day, I love training police dogs that go out and do stuff for real.
Yep.
I love it when our department send us notices that they're these dogs that we train from green dogs are out there like catching bad people and putting them away, and that kind of stuff makes us real happy at Tar Heel. So but yeah, like different things for different reasons. I love teaching. I like lecturing. Like I've always loved teaching, even when I was an economics professor, but I feel like the subject changed, but I still get to do the same thing, which is pass knowledge along to other people. So I like doing that, and I like doing it in sort of an atmosphere where people are enjoying what they're doing and having fun, and and so forth, and maybe don't always take themselves like terribly seriously. Although I sometimes suffer from that as well. I take myself a little too seriously when I'm like campaigning a dog or something like that, and sometimes I need to be reminded to like relax about it. Success usually happens when you're not pressing to be successful, right? So but yeah, like there's so much in my career that I'm thankful for, and now I get to travel around with Taylor, and we teach together, and that also is quite gratifying. Like being able to do that with somebody you really care about, and we share that love for being able to teach other people things. So that's been very enjoyable as well. But yeah, lots of things in my career I'm grateful for that I get the opportunity to do. Even sometimes, like I'll work with, not that I have to, I'll work with like a pet dog owner sometimes.
Yep.
And and I'm like, I'm not a half bad pet dog trainer too. So
we had a couple of questions submitted that were largely based around PSA, which we'll talk about in a second. But there was one question: how do I get my Labrador to stop pulling on the lead? So we won't answer it here and now, but there you go. It's still a fitting question, right?
yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned PSA then, and something I always have great difficulty is explaining to someone who is not involved with dogs
Right.
what PSA is and
Yeah.
why we do it.
Right.
So I'm sat there with a non-dog friend, and they're like, "What are you doing this Wednesday?" And I say, "I got PSA club," and they're like, "What's that?" It's like, "Dog bite club." I don't know how to. And they're like, "Okay, so what do you do?" And I say, "Okay, well, my friend Brad puts on a suit, and I get my dog, and I tell him to bite him, and I tell him to let go, and then he walks nicely next to me for a bit," and they're like, "Why?"
Why?
So I'm going to hand the question over to Jerry Bradshaw, who is the creator of PSA. What is PSA?
So I think, like, for me anyway, like, my first introduction to dog sport was when I had gotten that puppy that we were talking about, and that breeder had said, "Look, you got to join a Schutzhund club, and you got to get this book, and and just to be able to handle this kind of a dog, right?" And so of course back then I didn't know anything about dog sports, didn't even know they existed, right? So of course I researched it and found the Schutzhund organization at the time, the predominant one in the United States. So I, did what anybody would do back in the late 80s, early 90s, is I phoned them and I said, "I need to know more about, and I'm sure they were like, "Oh, this civilian is calling and, bothering us in our office and wanting to know about it." But they were actually quite nice and accommodating. And they said, there's the national trial is going to be like 3 hours away from you in Northern Virginia, near Washington, D.C. If you really want to know what sport is all about, you should go there and check it out. So, it's free to spectate. So booked a hotel, loaded up the puppy, went up there. And I think the thing that hooked me right off the bat was as the handlers came out to do their obedience routines, and back then it was only Schutzhund 3 dogs at nationals, right? So you had these like 50 or 60 dogs in the trial, and one after another comes out, and you just watch it's like poetry, right? And the dog, the handler, the harmony, communication, from one species to another is quite something to watch, right? And so I was there with my VCR camcorder from back in the day, that you had to put on your shoulder to put the VCR cartridge in and fit it all in, And I just remember videoing like dog after dog after dog, and they all came out, and they were all a little bit unique in how they exhibited these obedience routines. And at the end of the day, you're looking at it from the standpoint of, how did this person get this animal to be able to do all of these things in the rule book to perfection or close to perfection, and not only do them, but you get the sense that the dog, the human, they don't want to be anywhere else at that moment, right? And I feel that way when I'm showing my dogs, right? Like, you get out there and you're feeling a sense of unity, you're feeling a sense of harmony, and it kind of chokes me up to even think about it a little bit, because it's like you only understand it when you put in the work. Like, you put in the work for months and years. Months and years you put in work, and then it all gets displayed in like 7 to 10 minutes, right? And we're hoping for near to or close to perfection, right? We rarely get it, but I think it just keeps us like that uniqueness of that bond, and you just putting in all that work together, right? Really, I think is what drives us to do it. That's the why for me, I enjoy the journey of training, right? So I think there are some people who they really, they want the results of the trial, they want to be able to say, I got my level 1, I got my level 2, my scores and so forth. But I think, for me anyway, like, I really enjoy the journey. I like the problem solving that comes along with it. I can't say that I love the frustration that sometimes comes with trying to solve every single problem. But I think when you look back on those times, right, and you solve some of those problems, right, I think that's a bit of the gratifying part for us as the humans. I think for the dogs, it's just it's just a lot simpler. They just want to be with you, right? So
Yeah.
But yeah, like for me, the why of it is really comes down to the essence of what it is to be in partnership with these animals, and why we do these things anyway. Like, whether it's making lives better for pet dog owners and their dogs, improving communication, seeing a family in harmony with their pet dog. That's just like a smaller version of what we do, right? We're seeking harmony maybe on a little bit of a higher plane, a little deeper level, pressing the dog's genetics into service, a little bit more acutely. But I think it's very much the same. Like, you watch a family that's in harmony with their dog, it's like it's nice, right? It's beautiful to watch, as opposed to the opposite, which is sometimes the chaos that we walk into as pet dog trainers, where we're like, oh my goodness, like, I can't believe you're
synergy there.
I can't believe you're like having to put up with this, and it can throw the whole family into chaos and so forth. And when you sort all that out for them, right, like, that's a very gratifying thing. So, like, people who are in this business for pet training, right, I think provide just like an amazing service to the community at large, because we need so much of that nowadays. And I think it's really an important thing. But whether, like, I look at my job as a canine trainer, police dog trainer, trying to do the same thing. Like, we're using these dogs to do things that help keep human beings safe. We're pressing their genetics into service to locate people, locate contraband, right, things of that nature, apprehend bad people. And all of that, I feel like is a good thing for society at large, right? And a lot of what we do on the micro level, when you're a canine trainer, is making sure that handler and that dog are in harmony, right? Like, the whole theme of this past week, where I was working with the military and the police dogs, at the seminar I was just doing, that it was all about reducing conflict. Right? It's all about, like, how do we take conflict out of the training? How do we take conflict out of our deployments? How do we, get the handling and the dog trainers, and the handlers and the dogs on the same page, right? So where things flow efficiently, the training is efficient, to make the deployments efficient, all that sort of stuff. And I think that's, as dog trainers, kind of what we do all around, no matter what discipline we tend to focus on.
Sometimes I have a gripe with when people that maybe haven't been exposed to dog sports, or the reasonings as to why dog sports exist, may see a dog handler partnership where the dog is attention healing, and coming up with this beautiful obedience, and describing it as almost robotic and almost degrading the relationship that they're seeing in front of them, when it's quite, in fact, the opposite, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Like, when you watch the joy that these dogs have, and the performance of all these things that we're asking them to do, right? I think it's clear that these, especially the dogs that we use for or we're working with in police work or PSA, those dogs are really not fit for a like a life that is less than their potential, right? Like, watching animals do what they've been, like, bred to do, like, is a thing of beauty. Well, I don't care whether it's like watching like a English Shepherd work his border collie and move sheep around the countryside, or watching a dog do agility, or watching a field lab, running 200 yards, to a fallen bird. Like, all of that is fantastic, right? It's like watching, these dogs are, they're expressing, what God gave them, and I think that's a beautiful place to be.
I think sometimes when people see the element of control there, they presume that the dog is doing it out of duress. When again, if you look at the dog attitudinally, the tail's up and the head's up, and again, quite the opposite. So,
well, I think too, like, if you watch, you're an athlete in college and beyond, right? So you watch, athletics is very much the same in the dog world as is in the human world, right? Like, you have rules in your game.
Yep.
The rules have to be followed.
Yep.
They are oftentimes need to be enforced.
Yep.
And that's for the good of the the community as a whole that participates in sport, right? So, like, we all have to, the dogs have to follow rules when they're out on the field doing, PSA, whether in obedience or bite work. And, and part of our job as trainers and handlers is to set up the guidelines under which the dog can express, their God-given talents, right? Just like we do for athletes. We say, here's a construct in which you can express your talent. And I don't think there's much difference between the two. And I think there's, it seems silly to, celebrate human beings performing sport at a high level and not appreciating the same thing in dogs that are doing something very similar.
And each and every quadrant is present in human sport as it is in dog sport, right?
For sure.
And again, one of the arguments I have for the use of negative reinforcement is, if negative reinforcement was not motivating, then contact sports wouldn't exist, and it wouldn't be as fun as otherwise I'd be playing tag rugby instead of contact rugby. But contact rugby is way more fun because the consequence is higher, and the escape of that consequence is reinforcing in itself, right? So, what sort of role do you think protection sports play in making sure that we're continually breeding the right type of dogs?
It's absolutely essential, right? Absent dog sport, we wouldn't have, I don't think, police dogs. We wouldn't have military dogs. All those dogs that do service for us, right? So I don't care whether it's a seeing eye dog, or it's a hunting dog, or a bite sport dog. I think for being able to sort out the cream of the crop of those animals, right, you have to have some sort of hierarchy in which to do so, right? So bite sports are essential. We have to have some way to test the genetics and character of the dogs that we're going to breed, for future generations, to be able to do those same things. So, dog sport is really the basis on which, we've created, I feel like, some, really fantastic genetic specimens of the animals that we use for service work, for police work, military work. And I think if sport goes away, that goes away shortly thereafter. Sport people are in it for a different reason, right? Sport people are in it for the love of the animals, for the joy of the sport titles. Like, we put so much energy and effort into something for which we get just the joy of doing it, right? Like, we're not getting large paychecks.
Recently, someone asked me, so you went to trial? Yep. How'd you get on? Yeah, did pretty good. What'd you get if you win? Nothing. You just win.
Yeah.
Okay, do you get money or anything? No, that's not what it is. That's not what it's for. You just win. You and your dog win, and it's great. And
right.
I don't get it. Right, fair enough. But it is for the love, for the. I'm very competitive as a person, and I found it really. When I embarked on a career with dogs, I stopped all sport entirely because I didn't want to blow my knee out and then not be able to work.
Right.
And up until finding dog sports, I missed that competitive component in my life. So now that's come back. It does tick that box for me, and to do it with my dog. So Stark's my first sport dog. Ranger and Darla, I have two older dogs that were just kind of from the pound, and obviously I adore them. I adore training them, but there's obviously different caliber of animal when you then kind of take on a Malinois or whatever, right? And then just to tie those two loves together, it's just fantastic.
So I think so many people in PSA are former athletes, competitive people on some level, like Janet Edwards, who is one of the directors in PSA, one of the people who's been at the highest levels in the sport. Like not a lot of people know this, but when she came to work for me, I found out that she was a very competitive college softball athlete. And so, like, for the same reasons, like sometimes we have to leave those sports behind and make a living, and unfortunately, right? So for many of us, I feel like that's the case, right? Like, I've always been doing competitive things my whole life too, and it's a great way to keep that alive, right? And I can say, because I've been around the block for a little while, like, as you get older, you can still be involved in like something physical, right? But mostly my dog does that work for me.
Yeah.
And so it's still it's still very enjoyable, like like it keeps you busy, physically, because getting out there, and whether it's decoying or working puppies, young dogs, catching the big dogs out there at PSA Club, or just handling. It's a great way to be outside, be active, like, and a lot of those things that we love about sport when we were younger, to be able to keep doing those later on into life too it's a great way to keep that alive.
What do you think embarking on dog sports does for a dog trainer's skill set?
I think it's essential. Like, even all my trainers that go through my dog trainer school, I tell them, like, listen, if you're a civilian and you want to credential yourself, and be exposed to a competitive environment where you have to adjust your skill set all the time, right? You have to, if you're not winning, if you're, like, there are people who say, like, oh, I like to go out and do dog sport, I'm just not very competitive. I don't usually believe them, right? Everybody's a bit competitive, right?
Absolutely.
But in any case, I feel like if you go out there and you truly are competitive, you can't help but get better, right? You find yourself around people who are innovating. You find yourself around people who have tried certain things and it's worked, and you're like, well, I want to get in on that. I want to learn, so it's a great environment to keep, your skills pressing forward, to learn new things constantly. Like, we have, seminars. Like, I was just in a seminar last week, a police dog seminar, where we brought in a friend of mine from Canada who's a really fantastic trainer, and I got to be a student for a while, which is nice, right? I got to sit in the classroom, I got to ask questions, I got to listen to somebody else's perspective on things to help me grow my understanding of particular things in the police dog field, and I love to get that and love to have that happen. Even when I teach seminars and I'm watching people do things, right? Like, even beginners, I'm watching them work with their dogs and so forth. I always learn things by watching what other people are doing, right? So it's a great environment for that. And, to continue to be able to credential yourself for your business, and just be around people who are innovators. Like, most of the innovation in methodologies has come through sport, right? And if you want to win, right? I used to be an economist right before I left, and became a dog trainer. And we have a theorem that says resources flow to their most highly valued use, right? So if you ask people, like, why in sport training do you use this tool, or do you use this method, or do you use food, do you use toys? Because those resources show up where they're needed the most, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like that tells a story, right? Like if it wasn't better, we wouldn't be using it, right? If we could, and I always tell people, for example, if like purely positive methods were the pinnacle of dog training, I would be the first one to be doing only that because
Yep.
I want to beat everybody else.
Yeah.
The fact is they're not. And the fact that people use, like balanced approaches and other tools is evidence that if you want to come in first place, that you have to be able to master all of that, right?
Yeah. I recently had a conversation with someone online about there's a difference between using the e-collar as like aversion training versus just conditioning at low level as just a positive cue. Anyway, we went on to just kind of discuss protection sports, and I argued there was very few highly successful trainers in protection sports that were not using balanced methods. And her argument was that she didn't have a working dog. And I said, but your dog still has the same drives. It still has a prey drive. It still has a defensive drive. And I think people often forget that when we're working in protection sports, that we're still working on the same drives the Cocker Spaniel has and the same drives that the Labrador has, but perhaps on a more diluted level. So,
And sometimes not. Like a field-bred lab is a lot of dog.
yeah. Oh,
right?
yeah.
Like a cocker that Ben Lipinski, who used to work for me, he's got this Cocker Spaniel that he hunts with, and that dog is a lot of dog. Like it's a little dog, but it's a lot of dog, right? So these dogs that we say are pets or family dogs, a lot of them are coming from good breedings.
Yeah.
And you're dealing exactly with those same drives that we have to be able to to mold and be able to live with. Right?
Two of podcast episodes of yours I point my mentorship students to is desensitization and drive capping. And I know for the most part you're talking working dogs around decoys, but the concepts are exactly the same for working a reactive dog around their potential trigger, right? It's exactly the same.
Exactly.
So I think when people think, oh, working dog, protection dog and things like that, look, they're a little bit averse to it, but still remember the concepts and sometimes even the methods are exactly the same that I would apply to get my dog stuck more or desensitized to the presence of a potential trigger or equipment than you would a German Shepherd that is triggered by the postman, right? So,
absolutely. Yeah.
I have a question about PSA. Obviously, once upon a time, you've sat down and you've come up with various components to create the sport of PSA. What did you see lacking in the other sports without fucking slagging everyone off? What did we see lacking in the other sports that you thought created a need for the sport of PSA?
Well, there were other like surprise scenario sports that were kind of like fragmented and kind of floating around the United States at the time that we came up with PSA, and I actually competed in a couple of them. And without naming names, like some of the things that one of the things that I felt was really lacking in the surprise scenario sports that were available was like a good progression from lower levels to upper levels, right? And then sort of a commensurate increase in challenge and handling skill and so forth as you went up in the levels. That was sort of somewhat predictable, right? Like I felt like some of them were like you had an entry level and then like an advanced level, and the requirements for the dog and the handler, there was like an ocean in between the lower and the higher levels, right? So that I didn't like. The other thing I didn't like was the judging was very unpredictable.
Okay.
And one of the things I loved about Schutzen when I was in it was when you finish your routine and you have to stand there in front of the crowd and the judge gives a critique, like basically they have to say, here's why you scored what you scored. And they'll mention some things that you lost points on. They'll mention some things you did well, right? And so at least they have to justify their scoring to a certain extent, right? And so I felt like that was one of the things that was lacking in some of those surprise scenario sports. And so, like I like the concept of training a bunch of component behaviors, and then you show up on trial day and the judge puts them together in an order that maybe you didn't expect or whatever. And, so I thought, I felt like we could do a really good job of coming up with something like that. And it would be fun. challenging for us trainers to, to go back and have to work on those components and then, take a shot at it when you showed up on trial day. And so mainly that was it. It was just, I don't want to say I got tired of, like, I really appreciate the Schutzen sport and its incarnation today as like IGP, in the sense of there's something to be said for like striving for perfection.
Yep.
Right. And it's like, there's something to be said for saying, I know exactly what the rules are and I'm going to try and get so close to perfect, and some people have come pretty darn close, and some people have, gotten 100 in a phase or a couple of phases, right? I'm sure there's been some 300s given out over the last 10 years, but I think there's also a beauty in a sport where perfection is almost impossible, and we've put things in play in our sport in PSA to where we can adjust the sport. We can make things more challenging.
Yeah.
We can increase.
People are getting better, right?
Oh, people are getting so much better. But I think, but that's the rub, isn't it? Is like when I always said in the beginning, well, if we really challenge trainers, and at that time I only thought it would be a small sport in the United States, probably inconsequential for the most part. But I always argued to our board and to anybody who would listen was, if we could only gather the top 1% of trainers who want to keep coming back and hammering away at the impossible, I said, I can live with that. I can live with a small sport of, people who are, just trying to be the best that they can be at something they can never probably conquer, right?
Yeah.
Little did I know that so many people would come into the sport, and the level of training has gotten so much better, right? Like, people used to ask me, like, or the younger trainers sometimes will be like, well, what was it like when you first started PSA? And the first thing I tell people is, boy, the obedience has gotten so much more technical. Like, the level of precision that you can get with your dogs nowadays with the innovations in training, and not just like marker systems and tools and and things you can do nowadays is pretty astonishing. But also back in those days, like, there's a lot to appreciate about in the beginning when you didn't have a lot of those capabilities, and the knowledge level was different about dog training generally. And we had some pretty fantastic, powerful animals that we were working with back then, right? There's a lot to be proud of even back then of being able to get a dog to a level 3. Even though today, probably the obedience would be, twice or 3 times more technical than it was back then.
For those listening that don't have a understanding of the levels in PSA, you have your entry level, which is a PDC, then you have level 1. Level 2, where it gets a little bit spicy and there's a lot less predictability. Level 3, then pretty much anything goes.
Yeah.
And now there's only been 38 dogs in the history of the sport that have achieved level 3, and that's over even fewer handlers, right?
Yeah, because some of us have multiple dogs that we've taken to that level.
There's only 1 dog in the UK with a level 3.
Right.
1 dog in South Africa.
Yes.
Anywhere else?
No, I don't think so.
As training progresses, and people have joked about this, and in a million years, would you ever add in another level to PSA?
I don't know where we could go. I don't think it's necessary to add another level, but there may be some changes to the guidelines, or some changes to expectations that can be adjusted to make things a little bit more challenging.
How old is PSA?
PSA?
Yeah.
So 2001
is
when we started. So yeah, we're getting up there a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. How old Schutzen?
Don't know exactly when they were first established. I know KNPV is back to the early 1900s. Saying ring sport earlier.
Do you have any experience with NVBK and?
Only so much as I used to travel a lot in Holland and Belgium, and buy dogs and so forth. So I have seen, gone to clubs and seen some training and so forth, but I wouldn't call myself an expert in in those sports by any means.
Where would you like to see PSA in 10 years?
I don't know. Like, one of the things I really like about PSA is, like, whenever I travel around, is I love the, sort of the dynamic in most of the clubs. I love the demographics of PSA versus all the other sports that I know of. Is we've got so many, we attract so many young people.
Yeah.
And young trainers, and I love that because it really keeps the sport fresh, dynamic, exciting. We hardly have to do any marketing at all because of the age of the people that are competing in PSA.
It all over Instagram.
They're plastering it everywhere, right? So that's kind of nice.
Yeah.
Why
do you think that is?
I don't know.
I think it's just the components of the sport are a little bit more Hollywood than perhaps others.
Maybe, right? Like, so it's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
It's a little more of a spectator sport than some of the other sports are, I think. But I like to believe that from the top down, you get in PSA, you get a little more of a welcoming vibe when you go to trials, when you go to clubs. Like, all of our directors, when they're at trials, whether it's nationals or regionals, or even if we're judging local trials, I feel like we do a great job at welcoming newcomers. And not to say anything mean about other sports, but like, when I was a newcomer, like, you got to get over that. Like, I was a member of an IGP club, and a really good one. It was a Schutzen club back then. But I didn't get like a whole, well, we're happy you're here, Jerry, kind of a vibe when I first started going, right? Like, it's a little bit of a, well, if you can put up with the social intolerance long enough to get voted in as a member, where I feel like, in the younger dynamic in the PSA clubs, I feel like people are a little bit more open, a little bit more welcoming. And so I think people who are kind of new to sport, they don't get kind of a snobby vibe as you can get in some other sports. So I think that to me has got to have something to do with it. But I think it is, it's maybe a little bit more of an exciting sport, more fun to watch when you go to trials the first time or two. Kind of, get to see some really cool stuff.
Yeah, with the gunfire and the mechanicals and things like that.
Yeah.
Pretty entertaining. The
water, dumping
room
on
searches,
dogs,
the back of the van and stuff.
Yeah.
The reason I got into PSA was actually a video that Pat Stewart made. The 2021 Nationals.
Mm-hmm.
Really good video.
Yeah.
So I've watched that maybe 100 times.
Mm-hmm.
He's on our podcast next week.
Oh, nice.
So we're doing it over Zoom. So
Mm-hmm.
Michael Ellis is also on next week. So that'll be
Wow,
good.
You got all the big timers.
Yeah,
coming.
ticking you all off.
Yeah.
Ticking you all off. You're someone I wanted on here for a long while. Pat is definitely someone I wanted. Michael Ellis. Robert Cabral has also agreed as well. So
Oh, nice.
yeah, it'd be good. Some technical questions for you.
Sure.
Can you explain the difference between drive capping and this was a question that was written down. Build in neutrality.
So, like, for me anyway, drive capping is more taking an outward expression of drive and internalizing it, having the dog kind of internalize it for a short period of time in order for us to then, on cue, allow it to explode again.
Yeah.
All right. So, for example, with, like, let's say with a police dog, I might want to bring him into an area where, he knows he's going to get to do something that he really wants to do, which is like search for a human being.
Yeah.
So we bring him in, we put him on a down. We need him to cap all that energy that he's ready to put into that searching and be quiet and be still so we can make announcements, arrange our backup and all these things. And then, but when I tell him to search, I want him to explode off the blocks with tons of energy to put into the searching behavior.
So take that expression that he's internalized and push it into the behavior that we're looking for.
Yeah. So, that's why when we talk about drive capping, it's why we call it when the the internalized drive is not fully internalized and it starts leaking, right?
Yeah.
So what we mean by leaking is that drive is coming out in vocalizations, creeping, things like that. So my police dog, if he's leaking, he's going to be making noise, which I don't want, right? I don't want him giving away our tactical position. I don't want him making noise to where I can't communicate with my backup people or have a conversation because he's barking and so forth. And so, it could just be positionally, he's not staying still, right? Waiting for the next command. So, yeah, so for me, that's like capping. So it's more of a temporary thing, right?
Yep.
And then we want to use that energy that's internalized to then come out in the next activity that we're asking him to do, right?
Yeah.
Same thing, like if I'm drive capping my dog in obedience, where he's got lots of energy and let's say in his recall, he's coming with a lot of force. He's coming fast. He's very outwardly expressive of his energy is being expressed outwardly with. He's running as fast as he can to me, and then I tell him down, and he puts on the brakes and like slides like a clay court tennis player, right? And just gets into that down as fast as possible. But then I need to recall him and finish the recall. And I want him to take all that energy that he internalized in order to complete that down super fast and now express it in the second part of the recall, right? So that to me is the essence of drive capping, is that it's a temporary pause and internalizing of all that drive to then let it out right afterwards. Whereas if we suppress a dog with pressure, then we don't really have the energy stay internal, right? And then usually the recall afterwards would be slow, clunky, not very expressive, right? So we would lose speed, precision, things like that.
Is there an argument to say there's a component of the Premack principle in drive capping?
Oh, for sure. We're using it all the time, right? Like, yeah. I think if we look at neutrality, though, we're really looking at lowering the dog's state of arousal in generally around certain types of things that would normally get them aroused. So we're trying to, when we come out for our obedience routine, the level 3, I need my dog in a lower state of arousal around agitating decoys, right? So that's more of a longer term thing, right? So, and even how that gets expressed in trial for like a level 3 dog, okay, maybe you have a 7-minute routine, right? But in my training, my dog is holding a long down through that level of agitation for 40 minutes, 50 minutes sometimes, right? In training. So that my 7 minutes of glory when I trial at nationals looks at, like amazing. All right. But yeah, so like if you think about how we're trying to, like take those dogs' arousal level downs around those, common triggers of agitating decoys in the level 3. Yeah, I mean, we're really a lot of time involved in doing that, a lot of habituation, exposure, right? So, yeah, lots of principles are at play there to bring that arousal level down to where the dog can still think clearly, still function under command, still show like really good obedience behavior quality, like speed and precision and things of that nature. And the arousal isn't taking the dog into a place like emotionally where they get cloudy and unclear and so forth.
My next technical question is, if we are looking at a young dog, are there differences you would look for in that dog, whether you're going to decide they would make a good sport dog or a good real world working dog? Or are we looking at the similar sort of attributes in both of those dogs?
Yeah, it's a little hard to say, only because I think sport dog people have maybe more preferences in terms of what they want, right? Like, because I think a lot of sport dog people, they want the best of both worlds. Like, they want a dog that's going to be a good companion, live with them, as well as be a great sport dog. Right. So I think we have to look at that side of things a little bit. But for me, I think some people would assume the answer to that question might lie somewhere around, well, I want my sport dog to be more of a prey-driven dog. Maybe I want a little more balance between prey and defense in my police dog, because I want my police dog to be a little bit more savvy about potential threat and show a little bit more aggression, powerful aggression, and in certain situations, but yeah, I think most of sort of like the foundational elements of training a police dog and a sport dog are exactly the same. So I think some of it just comes down to the kind of temperament you might prefer as a dog that you're going to live with 24/7, as opposed to a police dog, which is probably going to be, staying in a kennel until, they're with their officers like 8 to 12 hours a day, right? Like doing their work and patrolling and so forth and so on. So, their off time, they're typically not family pets.
Yep.
Until maybe when they reach retirement age or something along those lines, when they slow down a bit. But for me, they're basically the same. I like the same qualities in my police dogs as I like in my sport dogs, which means I like my sport dogs to be a little serious, right? I like it when my decoys are just a little scared of my sport dog. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But again, I think people have more preferences on the sport side, and that's to each his own in terms of what they want to work with and live with and things of that nature.
We often get approached by people that have maybe sometimes a working line shepherd as a pet dog, sometimes a Malinois as a pet dog, and then your occasional Rotties, Dobermans, and they pose the question to us: I'm thinking about looking at doing some sport with my dog. Is there a danger that it could change his temperament once we start taking the sport a little bit seriously? What would you say to that?
I don't know. I feel like the vast majority of dogs that are maybe bite somebody in a situation that's unwarranted are typically the dogs that are untrained, right? So like, what's the feature of most sport dogs? Feature of most sport dogs or bite sport dogs is control, right? Like, so much of a premium is put on control. And so I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think you can, for certain dogs that have a predisposition to be kind of serious and maybe a little more on the civil side.
Yeah.
There might be, if you wanted to do a sport, I might suggest a sport that is maybe less civilly oriented and less serious. You know what I mean? Like in PSA, we're doing, hidden sleeve bites, muzzle, stuff and so forth. Whereas in other, like a sleeve sport or something like that, maybe a little bit less, less inclined to civil behavior, right? So I would say that I don't really think there's a danger. I think the trade-off is, if we're training dogs to be a little more civil in PSA, which is certainly true, the level of control we require is somewhat greater too, right? So I think there's certainly trade-offs there.
I think it's a little bit like tuning a car to increase the brake horsepower, but at the same time you need to make sure there's a good set of brakes on there too.
Absolutely,
and making sure they're doing that.
Yeah, I think it's more or less the people who do sort of like unfettered backyard bite work without the control,
back tying and cracking a whip and then feeding it a sleeve.
Yeah, it's like one of the features of like most PSA clubs, certainly mine, is you're not going to come to my club and just do bite work, right? Like, if you don't have aspirations to title your dog, if you're not coming out and working on obedience at club and at home, then you're not going to last long at my club, right? Because we want to make sure that if we are teaching these dogs bite mechanics and that kind of stuff, we also want to teach them how to behave right, around people in situations that are non-threatening and so forth. And I think it's incumbent on anybody who is working, any kind of dog, whether it's a pet dog, like to train it. It's a requirement to live in a society where we're up on top. Like, back in the old days when, you might be surrounded by 20 acres to your next neighbor. It didn't matter how your dog behaved,
Yeah.
I mean, and now, but we live in
Very different
in
world, with a lot more congested
cities.
population
We
straight
live
up.
where you're going to walk past people at the park and children, and like dogs have to be, they have to be trained to be able to function in the society that we actually have. So yeah, so I would say whether it's a pet dog, a golden retriever, a lab, whatever it is, socializing that animal properly. That's what we're in business for, right? Like socializing that animal properly, teaching them how to behave on a leash, teaching them how to behave in crowds. All of that sort of stuff is essential. Just like if we're going to do sport with our dogs, then we have to teach them also the other side, which is the control.
What should people be looking for in a PSA club to make sure it's an environment that cultivates their dog's success?
Well, I think when I suggest to people to go out to clubs, at least for me, I want to be around people I want to be around as a hobby, right? In our business life or work, like sometimes you have to be around people you don't necessarily want to socialize with, right?
I can't agree with that. I love all the people I work with.
Well, I mean, I'm
They're
thinking
all
more
great.
in terms of like sometimes
Office
certain
workers.
clients or office workers or whatever, right? Like you might be in a corporate building with 100 other people, and you don't
Yeah.
get to choose your, everybody that you work with sometimes, right? But I think, if you're gonna be spending, a Sunday afternoon or morning and afternoons in certain cases, right, where you're training all day, outside when it's raining and cold and all that stuff. It's kind of nice to be around a bunch of people you want to be around. So I always tell people, like, go to the club and make sure the vibe is your vibe, right? Like, not everybody has the same vibe. I feel like our vibe at our club is fairly professional, but we also like to have a good time, and we like to occasionally poke fun at each other and have some sort of like sense of humor where you can be a little self-deprecating, right? Like, because everybody's dog's going to make them look stupid occasionally.
Yeah, of course.
And you have to be okay with that, right? And then there are some clubs where your training director might be a little more iron-fisted and want, like, well, you have to do this and you have to do that, and here's the sequence, and everybody's being directed about what they do. And there are a lot of people out there who want to be basically led down the path of here's how we're going to train your dog. I like to cultivate a little more, of a independent atmosphere amongst my trainers. Like,
Okay.
I don't mind them asking me what they should be doing, especially in the beginning, but I also want them to be thinking about their own training program and thinking about, where do we go from here? Where do I want to go from here? Take responsibility for your training program so that when you come out to club and we say, okay, your turn is up, you can come out and discuss with the training director and the decoy. Well, this is what we did last time. Here's what I think we should do now. What do you guys think? What should our session look like? And be a little bit more collaborative. I like that side of things because I want the people around me, to be collaborators, because I need that for my own dog, right? I don't want to be the only expert in the room, right? So I like my trainers to become experts themselves and on a certain level, right? So that I can bounce ideas off of my decoys. I can bounce ideas off of my fellow trainers. And we can forget for a minute, that, I'm, the guy who, was one of the creators of the sport, and just be like, okay, we're a bunch of trainers here. I'm having this struggle with my dog. Give me some input so we can work this problem out together. Like, I love the collaborative aspect of club training. To me, is a big deal, right? Because if we were struggling over how to approach, let's say, a behavior problem in a pet dog, and you have 2 or 3 trainers on your staff, don't you want to be able to go into a room and be like, all right, let's examine this situation. We're running up against a wall with this particular dog's behavior. All right, let's all talk it out, right? And say, okay, just because I own the business and I'm the head trainer, I've got all the answers, and I don't, right? Like, so I feel like that's always a good thing, is to be able to collaborate that way and not have people feel like they have to constantly defer to the training director. I also like people to sometimes make mistakes. So, when somebody in my club says, I want to try this or do this, as long as it's not unsafe, I'll usually tell them, all right, well, let's give it a go and let's see what happens, right? Let's see if that's a good way to go. Sometimes in my heart, I might think that's not how I would do it. But then sometimes I get surprised, and like their approach turns out to be a really good one. And we all learn something, right?
How do we progress without testing different things, right?
Exactly, right? So, yeah, so for me, I really tell people, like, go to the clubs and make sure the vibe matches the vibe you want, right? Because if I get somebody in my club who just wants me through all their levels to, like, walk them through everything and hold their hand, that's not of interest to me. Like, I do that during the day.
Yeah.
Like, my training, my business training life is mostly that, is like walking people through stuff, right? So I like club because it's more collaborative. It's more of a collegial atmosphere for me than it is I'm in charge and everybody else does what I say, right? I think that's the biggest thing for me is picking a club, right? Like, you're going to sometimes have people go to clubs where everybody's just starting out.
Yeah.
That's not a bad atmosphere, right? Sometimes if you're good about, like, getting mentorship on some level, which is you bring people in to do seminars, maybe there's a sister club that has more experience, and people from your club go there to get insights and to do some training together, but yet you're a young club full of young people that are starting to put the ideas together themselves. Like, there's something good about that, right? There's always something good about, like, the discovery process, right? And then some people may be like a ranked beginner and they join a club like mine, and and they're like, wow, it's very intimidating because you got a lot of people that have had a lot of success for a lot of years. And for some people, that can be a very intimidating place to go.
How many PSA 3 titles are in your club?
Like, currently?
Yeah.
Like,
Is Ben in your club?
Ben, he's part-time in my club. He's, he moved a little bit east of us, a couple hours east. So he's got his own club, Crystal Coast PSA. So he's got his own club out there, but he and some of his club members, like, they're family to us. So they come all the time when they can. Ben's busy, doing Ben things, but they do come back and, and train with us occasionally, and we love it when they do. But we have obviously my dogs, Ann's dog, Ben's dog. We've had a few people get close, but out of 38, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Big old chunk.
Yeah, a good chunk. And I feel like we've got some up and comers that are going to be in the 3. Like Lindsay in our club is in the 3s now. She just had a great showing at nationals in the level 2s, and we'll have more dogs climbing the ranks over the course of the years. There's a lot that goes into that. Like, Janet used to be in my club when she had her first dog, and she's a really great trainer in her own right, and she's developed a lot of her own ways of doing things and stuff like that. But I still claim her to a certain extent, in our, sort of in our pedigree. But I feel like it's the vibe in our club is we want people to go out and title and do well, right? I always tell people, like, I don't screen your dogs when you come in, right? So if you have a dog that maybe a level 2 will be your level 3, that'll be that dog's pinnacle,
Olympus.
Right? Yeah. That's okay. But if you're going to be in my club, you have to aspire to take that dog as far as you can.
Yeah.
That's it. And if they do that, then I feel like they're like working within the spirit of our group.
So our audience is predominantly pet people, right? But there may be a couple of people now listening to this podcast that may go and look at PSA and maybe look at the video that I mentioned that Pat made and research a little bit further and think, hey, you know what, I might want to give this a whirl at some point. What would be your first line of advice for someone that is thinking about dipping their toe into PSA and they have not got a suitable dog yet?
Yeah. I think sometimes it's better to go see what it's all about before you get that dog, you know? I think sometimes people like rush into getting the dog and they oftentimes get a dog that's not quite so suitable. Somebody tells them it's suitable or a breeder tells them it might be suitable, but it's not quite so suitable. You know, so if you go to a club and get some idea about the sport, meet the people, see if you like the vibe, you're going to be spending a lot of time there, at least 2 days a week, if not 3.
Yep.
So, yeah, you got to want to be there, right? But once you get there, usually after a little time investment before you get a dog, you'll have a better idea of what you want, what kind of dog you want, you know, what kind of temperament of dog that you want, because those things, you know, vary a lot, right? And then you can leverage the guidance that's available in the club about perhaps sourcing a dog or getting a dog, right?
What sort of off-breeds are doing PSA at the moment?
Off-breeds. Well, we have one club member that's got a couple of Dobermans in our club. You know, we've got there's some I don't even know what to call them nowadays. Bully mixes, bully mixes, things like that, right? I couldn't care less, you know, what breed of dog is. We got, you know, some Dutchies in our club. We've got Malinois, we've got Shepherds.
For those of people that don't know, certain sports, they have to be AKC registered or Kennel Club registered, right? But PSA is open to
we don't care.
All and every breed of dog.
Yeah, you know, it's kind of, you know, we're the misfits of the dog show world, right? Of the sport world. Don't care about pedigrees, don't care about any of that stuff, right? You bring a dog and it works, and you have fun working that dog, and you can title it, then God bless you, bring them. Right?
What breed of dog do you have as your own?
Malinois, typically.
You don't have any other off-breed dog, or would you? And if you did, what?
Yeah, like over the years, I've had some, you know, little dogs here and there, and some other breeds, but for a while I had a German Shepherd. I feel like
that doesn't count. I'm talking like a fucking pug or something, Jerry. All right, can't be a Shepherd, can't be a Rottie, can't be a Doberman, can't be a Malinois.
I've had a couple of little dogs here and there, you know. They're fine, you know. I like
you won't be
like
getting
all
a sausage
kinds of
dog
dogs.
or anything.
Yeah.
Soon, maybe.
Yeah, just, you know, if they're cool, I like them. You know, they're fun dogs. You know. But yeah, like for me anyway, it's I've always been a Malinois guy. I love Malinois. I have aspired to get a female German Shepherd. I'd like a small, fast. Yeah. I really like twitchy, fast dogs because I'm slow. Yeah. Right. So I need my dog to compensate for me. Yeah. So I think maybe after I take Fire as far as I can, who's my current dog, I would like to get maybe a female German Shepherd.
How old is Fire?
He's about 5-ish right now.
And where are you at with him?
Very advanced in some ways, very rudimentary in others. Like he was it's actually Taylor's dog. We got him as a puppy after we first got together, and she mostly did all the work with him, raised him. She was doing mostly like tracking detection stuff with him when he was young. I did most of his bite work foundation. And then he kind of got to a point as he got older where he was being a little rude with her and a little over possessive of his toys and things like that. And he came up the line a few times. And then finally Taylor said, "You got to put some obedience on this dog because he's like driving me nuts." And so I started putting obedience on him. to do that only. And then, my dogs were getting toward the end of their careers a little bit, and Raptor was finishing out his career as I was just kind of getting going with Fire's obedience.
Gotcha.
And I was like, I kind of like him. He's a bit of a nutcase. Like, he's super, super ball crazy and driven and possessive. And so we've had a few milestones of being able to work together, where he's not trying to bite me over the ball and stuff like that. Yeah. So, but as I started working more with him, I liked working with him, and so we just kind of kept going. Mm-hmm. There were a few times when I first started working with him that I was like, maybe PSA is not going to be a good sport for him, because he would get very loaded when the decoys are on the field and start to try and bite me a fair bit, which I'm sort of getting to that stage of my career where I'm kind of a little bit more or less over handler aggressive dogs. I've had enough of them, right? But yeah, like, he's been a lot of fun. So
what's the worst bite you've had?
I was working. It was very, very beginning of my career, and we had this big Malinois that we were working that I had imported, and I remember I had a business partner at the time, and she was walking the dog, and I was still teaching, and so I had a shirt and tie on. I come back from teaching, and I was going, just stopping by to like help take care of the dogs in the evening. And I remember I was reading something from a newspaper. It was some clip about police dogs, just, I don't know, anything. And she happened to be walking that dog, and I was usually doing most of the decoy work for that dog. And he just got away from her and like straight went into my forearm, full bite on my forearm.
You're joking.
Yeah, and with my little shirt and tie on. And he had wrapped the long line around her leg. She was on the ground, so it was kind of not a great situation. But luckily, we had been working on his outs, and so like kind of like a Hail Mary, I set him down on a loose line, told him to out, and he did, and I like jumped back as fast as hard as I could to where he was kind of out of reach. I was out of reach, and so he was barking at the end of the line. She was wrapped up in the long line on the ground, and I was feeling I had 4 good puncture wounds in me. It was bleeding pretty good.
Yep.
And I'm like, I got to get in the house and get into the office there to clean myself up, and luckily she was able to get up and walk him to the kennel, and he was focused on me at the time. But it was pretty much that was probably the worst one, because I remember almost fainting as I was getting into the house.
Was there a trip to the hospital involved?
No, I just cleaned it out with some betadine and wrapped it up.
For you
out
there, isn't
back
it?
then, I was still half a graduate student at the time, so yeah. But that was probably one of my worst ones.
Any wacky stories from your police dog work? Apprehension stories?
Not so much those. Like just, I remember one time we were. This was also early in my career. We were working with a police dog, and we were working on, like the dog biting. We did like a little apprehension scenario, and then we had like backup people come on and start to take control of the suspect. And I remember the dog let go and started chasing one of the other trainers who was playing backup guy. And we were in our training building. We were indoors, right? So the dog, the handler had sent the dog off leash, and he was supposed to, once we started to come on, like clip his leash up, and then keep a little back pressure on, but he didn't. And then all I remember is like we all kind of like scattered. One person, we had a car in the middle of the training room, and one person ran up on the car. A couple of people ran into various rooms, and he chased my my one trainer for a little bit. Luckily, it was slippery floors, and he had sneakers on, and the dog didn't. So. He managed to be able to like get into a doorway or get into a room without getting smashed. But the dog definitely was chasing after him. So yeah, we've had a few situations like that where you know, it was kind of some close calls here and there.
These dogs that are big, formidable animals that are trained to bite with the molars and push into, what sort of damage are they going to do to someone in the absence of protective gear?
Well, a fair bit. And like the goal really is to provide, you know, some pain compliance to where like somebody who is unwilling to comply before will now comply, right? So one of the things that we really take a lot of pains to do is we want to teach, you know, like people ask like, why do you care about full grips? Why do you care about the stability of those grips and stuff like that? Is because we're trying to use the least amount of force to bring people into compliance who are usually some pretty tough, bad folks, right? And so, but we don't want to do a you know, more damage than necessary to be able to bring a situation under control and be able to have everybody go home safely. So, yeah, so you know, it's possible for there to be a fair bit of damage, but you know, sometimes the worst of it is just you know, some puncture wounds and you know, and a little bit of bruising, and you know, people are able to recover fairly quickly from that stuff. But you know, there's people out there who don't respond to tasers, that don't respond to physical restraints and stuff like that. And a dog bite can be quite convincing, you know, especially on an extremity, you know, where there's a lot of nerves and. You know, and people come under compliance fairly quickly, and our job is to, you know, get the dogs off the grip as quickly as possible to, you know, minimize any potential damage.
What is the reasoning behind the, I've heard some conspiracies, the push bite instead of the pull bite?
I think a push bite is first of all, it's a lot safer for the people who get bit.
Is there a liability aspect if the dog's making multiple bites? Then it could
potentially, yeah. Like, you know, there has
excess
to,
use
there,
of force.
you know, I mean, if somebody's fighting a dog, you know, that's probably going to happen, right? Like, there's a good chance that if they're trying to hurt the dog while he's taking them into custody, that the dog might react to that and try and avoid getting punched in the head and like shift his grip to a leg or something like that. And so we might get some multiple punctures for that reason. You know, but we're taking a lot of time and training time and energy to, you know, teach the dog good gripping mechanics, good stability, and so forth. So, you know, any of those situations should be minimized.
Jerry, I could sit here and ask you hours on hours of questions, but we're gonna get you out of the cold and get you warmed up, ready for the weekend. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for joining our podcast. Been very excited to have you down. So hopefully we'll have a good weekend.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I am honored to be a guest, and thanks for having me on.
Very welcome.